Good morning to all who have joined us virtually, especially our young people. My name is Sheila Campbell Forrester, your moderator for today. And this is the expert meeting we have been waiting for. It is my pleasure to welcome you. This week has been very exciting and the organizers are to be commended. Today is the culmination of all the activities bringing together evidence, youth perspectives, and action for the roadmap. I must commend our young people for their execution of yesterday's youth truth, which was of a very high standard. We listened to your voices and have taken note of recommended actions and the call for accountability. This expert meeting is designed to help us understand why it is important to prevent teen pregnancies, explore the implications for health of the adolescent mother and the family, as well as the impact of preventing adolescent pregnancies on sustainable development. It is intended to also provide the evidence to support our arguments and our work and to spur us into action. May I remind us of the theme for this week, which should be a constant reminder as we work to prevent adolescent pregnancies. No child mothers and accelerating the reduction of adolescent pregnancies. I'll just share a few facts related to this region, the Latin America and Caribbean region. It is estimated that the number of unintended pregnancies in girls aged 15 to 19 years in 2019 was 2.1 million. Around 2% of women of reproductive age reported having their first delivery before the age of 15. And in our region, it is noted that we are the only region in the world with an upward trend in births among girls under 15 years. Adolescent girls with no education or only primary education were up to 4 times more likely to initiate childbearing compared with girls with secondary or higher education. Girls from households in the lowest wealth quintile are 3 to 4 times more likely to initiate childbearing compared with girls from the highest wealth quintile. And an estimated 28% of girls aged 15 to 19 years were using a modern contraceptive in 2019. The objective of this meeting is therefore to discuss what are the factors contributing to adolescent pregnancy in the Caribbean, with particular focus on some key areas: legislative and policy issues that hinder access to services, the importance of education and information, access to services and contraceptives by adolescents and young people, and program and policy interventions to reduce adolescent pregnancy based on the actions outlined in the roadmap. It is fortuitous that this conversation is taking place in the middle of the COVID-19 pandemic, the magnitude of which we have never experienced before. This is all the more reason to engage each other as we observe the impact on the reproductive health and lives of young people. Is it making it better or worse? And how do we prepare to mitigate the risks of a predicted increase in teen pregnancies and sexual abuse? And I'm here thinking that this pandemic is not over and it will be with us maybe for at least another year. At this time, we also need to recognize the cell phone or digital technology as probably the greatest source of information and misinformation. Yet it can be used to transform the way we communicate with adolescents and increase access to services. Telehealth is one way we can reach more adolescents in a safe and in a way that meets some of their needs. We not only have a pandemic, but I just want to say we have an infodemic. We must find creative ways and just maybe start to reach and or lead adolescents to correct information and provide support for decision making and access to services. Just maybe this time is an opportunity to increase awareness by way of social media and find creative solutions to an age old problem. So, with that, let's hear from the experts. And we do have quite a formidable group of experts with us. And as we listen to them, we have to observe some housekeeping rules. This this event is being streamed live, and you are asked to post your questions on the social media platform streaming the event, and I think it will be YouTube. This will be forwarded to the moderator by way of the Zoom chat box and will include questions also which we received prior to this webinar. After the main address, and I would think that the address to be given by Dr. Sonia Cafe is the main address. Um, each presenter will be allotted a 5-minute slot, and we know that we we know that we will offer 2 minutes extra for those who need it, since one of our panelists will not be joining us today. The questions will be answered during the question and answer period, but we will be keeping time, so please bear that in mind. And now introduce our keynote speaker, who is Dr. Sonia Cafe. And if we could have her introduction on screen. Thank you. Dr. Cafe is a native of Suriname. She has a master's degree in health sciences, an MPH and a PhD in public health. She also has a diploma in sexual health. Sonia has worked for the Ministry of Health in Suriname as Deputy Director of Health Promotion and as Associate Professor in Public Health at the University of Suriname. She has been with the United Nations for over 20 years now. Prior to joining PAHO in 2003, she worked for UNICEF. At PAHO, she worked in the area of HIV STIs on country, sub-regional, and regional level for 7 years, and since 2015 as Regional Adolescent Health Advisor based in Washington, D.C. So, Dr. Cafe, we have a question for you, which we know you will answer during your presentation, and it is, why focus on the prevention of adolescent pregnancies in the Caribbean? And we would like for you to explore with us, why is the prevention of adolescent pregnancies important? And what are the barriers to the prevention of adolescent pregnancies, and how can they be addressed? Dr. Cafe.
Good morning, Sheila. Good morning, panel members, esteemed panel members, all the participants, the young people. It's really wonderful to be with you, to see and hear some of you. And definitely, Sheila, it's always a pleasure to be in your company. I am really privileged to make this brief introduction as a starting point for the discussion we will have with this really esteemed panel of experts gathered with us today. And so, yes, it is a pleasure to try and start responding to the question you asked: why focus on the prevention of adolescent pregnancy in the Caribbean? PAHO and UNFPA proposed the regional adolescent pregnancy prevention weeks. And we've been having discussions with stakeholders for more than a year to establish these weeks and the dates in agreement with the local stakeholders as a platform to call attention for this issue of adolescent pregnancy prevention. And it doesn't mean that we are hoping that we will only pay attention to this topic during this week, but we're hoping that this week will serve as an accelerator. And so, yes, it is a valid question to ask: why would we propose this as PAHO and UNFPA? Well, I came up with some answers, and I hope that towards the end of this webinar that you will agree with me on the answers to the question why. First of all, and I think you illustrated it already really well, Sheila, an important reason why we should focus on adolescent pregnancy in the Caribbean is that adolescent pregnancy, adolescent fertility is still a significant public health problem, with a disproportionate burden in the most vulnerable groups of adolescents. Here we can see some of the data, right? The global estimated adolescent birth rate sits at 42.5. I like to use period estimates rather than annual estimates because they vary. And definitely when you are speaking about smaller countries, the period estimate gives a more solid a picture of where we are. And so for the period 2015 to 2020, the estimate is that on global level, the adolescent birth rate is 42.5 per 1,000 adolescent girls in the age group uh, 15 to 19 years. In North America, it's 18.9, in South America, 62.9, in the Caribbean, 60.1, and in Central America, 64.0. And so, definitely, as the Caribbean is above the global and way above 20 points above the global average. And if you follow the red line, which reflects the Caribbean, you can also see that over the past years, between 2010 and 2020, the estimate shows that there is a bit of a stagnation. Even though there has been a downward trend, it's flattening. And so that is concerning. It means we are not making progress as we should to continue to reduce adolescent pregnancy in the Caribbean. Now, when we look at the regional average of 60, then it's important to take into account that that does not tell the whole story, right? Because there are major variances between countries. And here you see in this slide, we see the differences between, for instance, Guadeloupe, that is just about 15 births per 1,000 girls, to Suriname, Belize, Guyana, and Dominican Republic that are above, say, even the regional average of 60. And so there are really major variances between countries. So when we speak about addressing adolescent pregnancy in the Caribbean, we have to take into account that countries are in different places right now. And then if we dig a little bit further, then we also notice that there are also major variances within countries. And here I'm using the example of Guyana for their mix survey in 2014. But this is really not exclusive to Guyana. We see these same trends in other countries in the region, in the Caribbean and beyond, where we see that there are major variances within countries. And I think you mentioned that, Sheila. We see that young people, adolescent girls of the poorer, lower educated groups and the rural versus urban, that they are disproportionately affected, persistently disproportionately affected. And also ethnicity plays a role. For instance, in Guyana, you see that the Amerindians are disproportionately affected compared with other groups. And so when we speak about adolescent pregnancy prevention and the importance of it, even countries that may be below the regional average should not be complacent, because it could be that within those countries there are pockets of adolescent girls who are heavily affected by adolescent pregnancy. So the second answer to the question of why is related to the enormous cost associated with adolescent pregnancy. And one of the things that I notice myself doing and others sometimes is that we speak in terms of very general statements related to the cost, that it negatively affects the life, etc. We all know that, but in today I want to focus on something, and I borrowed from our colleagues from UNFPA, that is called opportunity cost for of adolescent pregnancy. And this is important because policymakers often listen to us when we speak in terms of dollars, right? And so a very interesting UNFPA study in 6 Latin American countries identified and estimated the opportunity cost related to the education gap, income gap, labor gap, medical cost, and lost government income. And even though it's Latin American countries, I'm very sure that these same principles apply, and would be really interesting to do some of these studies in some of the Caribbean countries. Because, for instance, the education gap, women who have had children as adolescents in these studies were 3 times less likely to obtain a university degree. Where also 24% had, on average, 24% less income. And more risk of being unemployed or in the lower employment groups, etc. And so it's really staggering if you start calculating the cost. And I think this is when governments might pay attention. And again, as I said, this was not in the Caribbean, but I just wanted to show you the enormous cost associated with this. In Mexico, what they are estimating is that the country loses around $4 billion when in opportunity costs associated with adolescent pregnancy. So we're talking about real dollars here. And you can even express it in terms of percentage of the GDP. Now, moving on to the next question, the next answer, if you're still not convinced why it's important. The third one is, we know what works to reduce adolescent pregnancy. We have no reason to be ignorant. And I will not speak a lot about this because the panel will go in depth into what works. But we know what works. The evidence is strong, and it's getting stronger every day. In addition to information, education, counseling, access to health services, to contraceptives, it's also important to ensure that we implement evidence-based interventions at scale, that we ensure that we address first the most vulnerable, that we remove barriers, and that we apply a whole of government approach. In the the technical brief that we shared some examples, some positive stories from countries in our region, including in the Caribbean, who managed to reduce adolescent pregnancy rates in a very short time, 3 to 5 years, substantially. So we know what works. Number 4, and I'm almost done, the impact of COVID-19. And Sheila also alluded to that. This is an unprecedented challenge, not only in terms of public health, in terms of lives lost, but also in terms of social and economic impact. What we are seeing, the projections from ECLAC, are that we are at risk to lose 10 years of socioeconomic development, it means that we will have a negative growth um, in the years following this pandemic. We will see an increase in poverty and extreme poverty. We will have the estimate is that the poverty levels will go back to a level of 14 years ago. And then if we think about the fact that the most vulnerable, the poorest, are more affected by adolescent fertility, then we understand that this is very concerning. But there's also this very direct impact on interruption of health services. And here, sorry, it's very small to read, but the very first bar speaks to interruption in family planning and contraceptive services. And so in this survey that was done by WHO in 20 countries, about half of these countries said that they have had some interruption in services. And pardon, and a survey that was done in our region on among youth really confirms that. It was Caribbean and Latin American youth, and I think over 30% mentioned that they have a reduced access to contraceptives and sexual reproductive health services. And then finally, why focus on prevention, even if we don't care about money, even if we don't care about the impact on our societies? Sexual and reproductive health is a right. And I think yesterday in the youth meeting, the young people were very clear about that. They know that it is their right. They have the right to have a positive, pleasant sexual and reproductive health experience that will contribute to optimal health and development. And so I just want to close with this. We know that earlier this week, the young people successfully launched the roadmap that was developed in a collaborative effort. And in this, the young people are calling for specific services, for specific actions by the national and local authorities to create this supportive environment, to increase their access to information and services, and to involve them in the solutions. And so really, the time to act is now more than ever for us to address adolescent pregnancy in the Caribbean. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you, Sonia, for really setting the tone for this meeting. And it is interesting that you should be.
Sheila, could you speak up a little, please?
Thank you, Sonia. Can you hear me now? Okay. For setting the tone for this meeting. And I know that we will be reflecting on many of the points that you've made, which are very, very important to the work that we have to do in the future if we're really going to reduce adolescent pregnancies. Thank you. And now we're going to go to our panel discussions. And the lineup of panelists include Dr. Chandra Muley, Miss Veronica Sinek, and I'll introduce them separately. We also have Miss Agnes Shidankia, who is a technical advisor with UNFPA, and also Miss Donna Da Costa Martinez. We also have Antoinette Hans, who is one of our young people doing a lot of work, and those would be our panelists for the morning. Unfortunately, we will not be able to have the panelists from the Ministry of Health. in Trinidad and Tobago, but we will make the best efforts yet to bridge that particular gap. So I'm going to start off with Veronica Sinek, and we're going to introduce her first, although I see, yes. Veronica is an attorney at law with over 20 years experience. Her substantive occupation is a practicing barrister, solicitor, notary royal, and legal consultant in the firm of Law Solutions Incorporated, which was preceded by 6 years as a Crown Attorney in St. Lucia. She has led consultancies for UNAIDS, UNDP, PAHO, ILO, CARICOM, PANCAP, the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States, Government of St. Lucia, and other governments in the Caribbean. The Global Fund to fight AIDS, tuberculosis, and malaria. And within her practice, she has committed to and provides an ongoing pro bono legal service to persons living with HIV and AIDS and the LGBT community in St. Lucia. She holds a legal education certificate from the Sir Hugh Wooding Law School in Trinidad and Tobago. And she also holds a Master's of Law from the Institute of Comparative Law at McGill University in Montreal, Quebec. And it is such a pleasure to have Dr. Veronica Sinek with us. And she's being asked to address the question, what are the legal barriers to the prevention of adolescent pregnancies, and how can they be addressed? Over to you now, Dr. Sinek.
Thank you very much, Sheila. And I will apologize for having my video off. My internet is very unstable, and I'm trying to ensure that there are no interruptions to the presentation, and I hope everyone can hear me. Just a point of correction, it is Miss Veronica Sinek, not doctor. I only hold a master's, not a PhD. Wouldn't want to mislead anyone. First of all, let me say thank you to Sonia for that excellent presentation that she gave, and to the many young persons who are joining this meeting. I claim my first love in terms of the youth movement. That is where I got my start in terms of the work that I do now, as president of the National Youth Council of St. Lucia and Caribbean Federation of Youth, which is now the Caribbean Regional Youth Council. So my presentation follows a study that we are concluding for UNFPA in the Caribbean, looking at laws and policies affecting sexual and reproductive health in 22 countries from the Caribbean, including the English and Dutch territories. And in answer to the question, I think there is a very, in terms of the legal barriers, one of the clear issue is the limitation in terms of the access to health by adolescents without parental consent. In many Caribbean countries, there is a widening, if you want to call it, legal gap, whereby an adolescent can consent to sexual activity at 16 in some countries and at 15 in others, for example, in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, but cannot access sexual and reproductive health services without parental consent until they are 18. And by sexual and reproductive health services, it is also the understanding that in some cases it includes information and advice. There are some very difficult issues around what is or what can be allowed in terms of comprehensive sexuality education for the understanding of children. Jamaicans would have been very familiar with the controversy that happened a few years ago, 2013, 2014, with the revision of the curriculum in schools for Jamaica, in terms of looking at all aspects of gender expression, etc., and what that caused. And so information is also an issue, not just services, including treatment. In Anguilla, Antigua and Barbuda, the Bahamas, Barbados, Belize, Bermuda, the Cayman Islands, Dominica, Grenada, Montserrat, St. Kitts and Nevis, Turks and Caicos, the law is silent on the issue as to whether a child can seek medical services and treatment without parental consent. The law does not state that healthcare providers cannot provide treatment to persons under the age of 18. Neither does it state that they can. However, doctors and other health providers operate on the basis that the legal age of majority is 18, and so any person under 18 cannot receive treatment without their parents. At law, children do not have the capacity to consent unless it is expressly stated otherwise in law. In Antigua and Barbuda, the British Virgin Islands, Guyana, Jamaica, and St. Vincent and the Grenadines, the age at which a minor may consent to medical treatment without parental consent is 16. In Trinidad and Tobago, a minor who has attained the age of 16 but is below the age of 18 may consent to giving a blood sample without parental consent. And that provision is also present in some other countries. But below 18 does not have the right to access SRH services without parental consent. Such laws and policies within the region requiring consent to access medical services and treatment, especially sexual and reproductive services, including HIV testing, treatment, and prevention, is a primary barrier to accessing sexual and reproductive health services for adolescents and therefore for the prevention of pregnancy. They serve to refuse and deter adolescents from even inquiring about sexual and reproductive health services. The result is that adolescents are unable to obtain services, information, and contraceptives to protect themselves from pregnancy, HIV, and other sexually transmitted diseases. In a decision in the House of Lords, which is a case of Gaelic and West Norfolk and West Beck Area Health Authority, the House of Lords dealt with the issue of adolescent competency and have formulated what is called the Gaelic competency test. This test is in line with the concept of the evolving capacity of the child pursuant to the Convention on the Rights of the Child. And I'll just go to the convention briefly first. The convention recognizes adolescents' ability to make free and responsible decisions pertaining to their health under the concept of the evolving capacity of children. In its general comment number 15 on the right of the child to enjoy the highest attainable standard of health, it recognizes that children evolving capacities have a bearing on their independent decision-making on their health issues. The committee has therefore recommended that states should consider allowing children to consent to certain medical treatment and interventions without permission of the parent, caregiver, or guardian, such as HIV testing, sexual and reproductive health services, including education and guidance on sexual health, contraception, and safe abortion. The Gaelic test, taking into consideration what was provided, or the Gaelic case in what is provided in the Convention of the Rights of the Child, expanded that to a set of guidelines that could be used to determine whether or not a medical professional can provide services. In that case, a mother claimed that the actions of the Department of Health and Social Security in providing contraceptive care to girls below 16 years were unlawful. The House of Lords, in hearing the case and agreeing and disagreeing with the mother, set out certain guidelines in which a doctor would be able to give advice and treatment to a person under 16 without parental consent if that medical professional is satisfied that the child, although under 16 years, will understand the advice. Secondly, that the doctor cannot persuade the child to inform their parents or to allow them to inform the parents that they are seeking contraceptive advice. Thirdly, that the child is likely to begin or to continue to have sexual intercourse with or without contraceptive treatment. And fourth, unless the child receives contraceptive advice or treatment, the physical or mental health of both are likely to suffer. And lastly, on number 5, that it is in the best interest of the doctor to give the child contraceptive advice, treatment, or both without parental consent. So this was set out in a 5-step test by Lord Fraser. And it's similar to what I just said, but there's some slight variances. But the 5-step test, which is guidance for medical professionals, state the child, one, that the child understands the advice, first hurdle to clear. 2, as we said, cannot persuade the child to inform their parents or allow the doctor to inform the parents. 3, that they are likely to begin or continue sexual relations without the treatment. 4, that the absence of the contraceptives would be physically or mentally injurious to the child. And 5th, that it is in the best interest to give the contraceptive advice. And I restated it because the Fraser guidelines apply to advice and treatment relating to contraceptive and sexual health. But Gillick competency is often used in a wider context to help assess whether a child has the maturity to make their own decisions and to understand the implication of those decisions. Very importantly, following a legal ruling in 2006 in the case of Axton and the Secretary of State for Health, the Fraser guidelines can also be applied to advice and treatment for sexually transmitted infections and the termination of pregnancy. So in that case, it is authority for medical professionals in the absence of a clear statement of law as to the age at which a child can access services to apply the Gillick competency test to access sexual and reproductive health services, treatment for sexual transmitted disease infections, and for the termination of pregnancy. The test has been adopted in some Caribbean member states in law, including in the Bahamas and Trinidad and Tobago in terms of administrative law jurisprudence. And it's not really applicable in our cases. So one of the issues is that where the law, in the countries where the law is silent, where there is no indication of a minimum age at which a child can access sexual reproductive health services, the Gillick competency test can be promoted as a methodology for medical professionals to apply. Guyana is an example of this in its medical professional regulations. Guyana has adopted a modified version of the Gillick competency test. In the guidelines in St. Lucia for the treatment of HIV and other STIs, it is stated the Fraser guidelines are indicated as a methodology for medical professionals to determine whether or not to provide services. In the cases that I mentioned before, where the law is explicit in terms of the age, so for example, as we stated, in Antigua and Barbuda, BVI, St. Lucia, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Guyana, Jamaica, Montserrat, and the Turks and Caicos Islands, it will be difficult to apply the Gillick competency test because the legislation will rank above case law or the application of case law. In those other cases where it doesn't, then it may be promoted as a policy option. There are also exceptions in cases where through marriage, a child becomes or attains a majority. So in most cases where the age of majority is 18 and marriage is allowed with consent at 16, marriage operates to attain a majority. So if a child between 16 and under 18 is married, they can generally access services without any third-party consent. So in addressing that, that is one of the key legal impediments to the prevention of sexual, to the prevention of pregnancy in the Caribbean. It is really based on the interpretation of the limitation, both in terms of the information that one can give a child who is considered a minor, and in terms of the limitation on medical professionals to treat persons who are, where the law is silent, under 18, and in other cases where they are under 16. The recommendation that is generally made is that the laws should be enacted to guarantee the age of access to sexual and reproductive health services without restrictions in terms of age, marital status, and third-party authorization requirements, in line with the Gillick competency test in that legislative framework or otherwise in policy frameworks. And given the short period of time that I have, I will stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Veronica, for an excellent and very thought-provoking presentation. I'm sure we'll have several questions on this issue, since it is one of those which is very challenging to the Caribbean. And I'll move on to our next presenter, and he is Dr. Chandra Muley. He leads the work on adolescent sexual and reproductive health in the World Health Organization's Department of Sexual and Reproductive Health and Research. And that includes a number of different agencies, in the UNDP, UNFPA, UNICEF, WHO, and the World Bank Human Reproductive Program. Welcome, Chandra, and we await your presentation where you will seek to answer for us some questions. What does the evidence tell us about the importance of sexuality education? And what are the realities on the ground with regards to sexuality education? Over to you now, Chandra.
Greetings from WHO, and thank you, Sheila, and thanks to the organizers for inviting me to contribute to this webinar. So to respond to this question, what is the evidence of the need for sexuality education, the effectiveness of sexuality education, and the reality on the ground? The next slide, please. I'm going to make 3 points in this very short presentation. And the first one is that children and adolescents need sexuality education. Sonia stressed that already, and I'm going to build on that. The next slide, please. Every year, an estimated 1.1 million adolescents die, mostly from preventable causes, from a range of issues. And in relation to sexual and reproductive health, one cause is deaths from unsafe abortion. Every year, tens of millions of adolescents experience illnesses and injuries that hinder their ability to grow and develop to the full potential. And these illnesses can be sexually transmitted infections, for instance. And injuries can be injuries sustained physically and mentally due to coerced sex, which does not kill, but causes huge harms at many levels. And thirdly, hundreds of millions of adolescents live in unhealthy environments, develop habits that will cause problems for them, their families, and their communities in the years ahead, and develop inequitable gender attitudes. The next slide, please. I'm just going to take one example. This has been touched on but hasn't been spoken in detail so far. But studies around the world show that boys and girls by the age of 15, so these are unmarried, largely unmarried boys and girls between 15 and 19 around the world, think it's perfectly all right for a man to beat his wife on 5 grounds shown on the bottom of the slide. If she disrespects him, if she leaves the house without his permission, if she refuses sex, if she burns the food, if she does not take care of the child. And what is even more shocking is that girls believe this to be true much more than boys across the world. They learn this from home. So sexuality education is not just about using contraceptives to avoid an unintended pregnancy or condoms to avoid an unwanted sexually transmitted infection. It's also about building equitable gender norms. The next slide, please. Veronica talked about rights to services, but children and adolescents have a right to sexuality education as well. Next slide, please. In 2018, UNESCO published the International Technical Guidance on Sexuality Education. We published a synthesis of WHO's recommendations on adolescent sexual and reproductive health. This document is available on our website, and I'm happy to make it available to participants in follow-up to this meeting. We got a human rights lawyer to make the case for the delivery, the legal case for the delivery of each of these interventions. On this slide, you see the point in relation to CSC, Comprehensive Sexuality Education. And here the right is framed in the context of survival and in terms of growth and development. So there is a basis for this in international law. So the first point I made was there is evidence of the need for sexuality education. The next slide, please. There's convincing evidence that sexuality education helps and does not harm children and adolescents. The next slide, please. All these points are taken from the International Technical Guidance, and I'm going to go over them very quickly. Firstly, sexuality education has positive effects in the points listed on the slide. It does not increase sexual activity or sexual risk-taking behavior. And this is important, but it's also important to know that sexuality education, in order to translate into improvement in health outcomes, needs to be combined with other interventions. There are some adolescents with information can take charge of their lives. There are many others who can't. They need a supportive environment for them to do so. So sexuality education on its own is not a magic bullet to achieve the things that need to be achieved. Other pieces of evidence is that abstinence-only programs are not effective, that programs that address gender inequality, gender power differentials are much more likely to result in changes at the level of behaviors and health outcomes. And as I said earlier, sexuality education programs work when they are part of a package of actions. The third point, my third and last point. Next slide, please. The third point is that we have a fair amount of evidence now that the reality on the ground in terms of translation of evidence to action is uneven and patchy. Next slide, please. We have a plethora of tools. We have evidence on effectiveness, on cost effectiveness, on scaling up sexuality education. We have tools, toolkits full of tools on advocacy, on program design and management, and on measurement. CSC has been included in a number of regional and national commitments. Next slide, please. Despite that, as the UN Secretary, the then UN Secretary General noted in 2014, most adolescents and young people don't have access to it, despite the fact there are intergovernment agreements, support from the UN system, project level experience, and a wide range of countries and research showing its effectiveness. A paper by Nicole Haberland and Deborah Rogo in 2015 listed all the reasons in terms of why programs are ineffective. Now that was 5 years ago. Next slide, please. The next slide is a set of 3 papers published by the Guttmacher Institute with collaborators in Ghana, Peru, and Kenya, essentially saying the same thing. You know, the delivery of CSC in the classroom leaves much more that needs to be done. Next slide, please. What is even more, I heard a quick comment, I think it was by Sheila, there's not only the problem of poor delivery of programs. So, you know, weak design, watered down poor delivery. But what has happened in many countries is backlash, which paralyzes sexuality education. This Population Reference Bureau flyer is about Egypt. In the Arab Spring, they took the new government stopped it, saying it was un-Islamic. My country, India, has done the same, saying it's un-Indian. So, all these countries have stopped CSC on a number of grounds. Next slide, please. And this is my last slide. The reality on the ground is that we are failing our adolescents and children and adolescents, homes, schools, elsewhere in the community. I'm 62 years old now. I've lived outside India for 30 years, 10 years in Africa, 25 years in Switzerland. I still remember getting sexuality education from a classmate on the sidelines of the school playground when I was 13. And what I remember now is him telling me that my parents did this. And I said, wow, I can't imagine my father having sex with my mother. When I was 16, I was in biology class. I remember still the face of the biology teacher, hemming and hawing, and then finally saying, don't worry about this chapter, you'll not have questions in class. Finally, what is new today, which wasn't true in my time, is that you have hardcore pornography accessible to young people on their mobile phones, and they can't talk to their parents about these issues, or teachers, or other adults in their lives. So to conclude, we have convincing evidence of the need for sexuality education. We have strong evidence of the effectiveness of sexuality education in improving knowledge, in improving understanding, and when combined with other interventions, leading to safe behaviors and improved health outcomes. And thirdly, with notable exceptions from a small number of countries, the delivery of sexuality education is very weak. And this is not just in low and middle income countries. The UK has been one of the big champions of sexuality education globally, but it's only in 2020 that it has become statutory. The US is in another world altogether. We published a paper on sexuality education in Texas. There's no national policy, no state policy, no county policy. Every school decides what to do. And many of these schools are packed with born-again Christians who are opposed to sexuality education. So a lot needs to be done in high, middle, and low-income countries. Over to you, Sheila. Thank you.
Thank you, Chandra, for an excellent presentation. And we know we have a lot of work to do in this area. And I'm sure there will be many questions for you as we consider what are the realities in the Caribbean region with regards to sexuality education. And we did hear some of it from Veronica. Thank you very much. Our next presenter is Agnes Chidankir. Is a technical advisor with UNFPA Technical Division in the Commodity Security Branch, and her role is to lead the expansion of a broad mix to allow for access to a wide range of different contraceptive methods in 46 priority countries. So she heads the Reproductive Health Commodity Security, and her work focuses on the introduction of new contraceptive technologies and scale up of existing and lesser used methods. And I'm sure she will have a lot to tell us about her work. And the question we have for her specifically is, what does the evidence tell us about access to services and free, full and informed choice of contraceptive methods by adolescents? Over to you, Agnes. Thank you.
Thank you, Sheila. Greetings to everyone, and thank you to the organizers. It's a great honor to participate in this very important technical meeting. The UNFPA is the lead UN agency for sexual and reproductive health. In 2018, UNFPA set some ambitious goals towards the 2030 agenda, namely to end unmet need for family planning, end preventable maternal deaths, and end gender-based violence and harmful practices. UNFPA works in about 156 countries around the world, and our work revolves around supporting governments in these countries on these transformative goals. My focus today is on ending unmet need for family planning through access to contraceptive methods. Evidence shows us contraception is a key tool for people to achieve their goals. Avoiding unintended pregnancies in adolescents increases their possibility to stay in school, advance in education, and boost economic prospects. And I think Sonia has covered some of these very well in her presentation. The evidence also shows us that although we have just over 300 million women and adolescent girls using contraception in developing countries, we also have about 214 million who want to use contraception but have no access. Those are what we call women and girls experiencing unmet need for family planning. We know that about 18 to 20% of these are adolescent girls who are at highest risk of unintended pregnancy and HIV infection. Complications of pregnancy and childbirth are the leading cause of death in adolescent girls aged 15 to 19 in developing countries. Adolescent pregnancy is harmful to the health of infants. Babies or adolescent mothers are more likely to die, to have low birth weight, and to have long-time ill effects. Rights, access, and choice are at the center of UNFPA family planning programming. A key area that UNFPA has been working very closely on with governments is to expand the range of contraceptive options and technologies that women and adolescent girls can access in these countries. In order for women and adolescent girls to make free and informed choices that suits their needs and circumstances, there has to be a broad range of contraceptive methods they can choose from. Choice and access is very much ingrained in the human rights-based approach and quality of care that UNFPA abides by. In family planning programs, especially at UNFPA, we advocate for a contraceptive basket that has a broad range of reversible contraceptive methods. I just want to highlight the range of contraceptive methods that are currently available in the public sector and suitable for adolescents. We have implants. These are long-acting and reversible for effective duration of 3 to 5 years, depending on the type of implant. We also have intrauterine devices. There is a hormonal type that is effective for up to 5 years, or a copper-based type effective for up to 10 years, and both are reversible after removal. For injectable contraceptives, we have some that are effective every month and others that are given every 3 months. I hope you have all heard of the DMPA subcutaneous injectable, which can also be self-administered, thereby providing an option for self-care. There are also vaginal contraceptive rings. There's a new one on the market, a vaginal ring that is effective for 12 months and is worn 3 weeks every month to allow for menstrual period. For contraceptive pills, we have the combined oral contraceptive pills, and then we have the ones that have progestogen only, and they're taken daily every month to prevent pregnancy. We also have emergency contraceptive pills. These are taken within 72 hours of unprotected sex to prevent pregnancy. We all know that all these contraceptive methods do not protect against HIV or STI acquisition. Male and female condoms are the only known methods that have triple protection against unintended pregnancy and HIV and STIs. So we can't emphasize enough on the use of condoms for prevention of unintended pregnancy and HIV and STI. In the UN, we rely on the World Health Organization. I'm glad Dr. Chandra is with us, which is an important body for setting normative guidance and standards. And its mandate is endorsed by all member states of the UN. WHO regularly issues the medical eligibility criteria for contraceptive use guidelines. These guidelines are developed by a number of technical experts based on the underlying principle of safety of the methods and guided by the principles of access to the choice of contraceptives. The WHO medical eligibility criteria recommends all the reversible contraceptives I've just mentioned as suitable for adolescents. The medical eligibility criteria looks at contraindications related to pre-existing medical conditions or current medications the client might be taking that might be considered as contraindications for a particular method. Age of the client is not a contraindication for any of the reversible methods. Being an adolescent is not a contraindication to any of the reversible contraceptive methods. All these methods are suitable for adolescents depending on their need and circumstances. So why does the evidence show us that adolescents in most settings are only able to access condoms and oral pills, and very few can access the other long-acting reversible methods? Method mix of a country shows us the profile of the level of use of different contraceptive methods. We do know that the method mix of a country can alert us to certain factors such as provider bias, user preference, or a combination of both. So how do we accelerate progress given the evidence for unmet need for family planning for adolescents? Evidence shows us that there is early marriage and early sexual debut in majority of the countries. And I think this was also presented earlier. Therefore, access to services and contraceptive methods, free and informed choice, is something we cannot ignore. And most importantly, we know that when there is access to a full range of contraceptive methods, uptake is improved and rates of discontinuation are reduced. My last point, Sheila, is we need to build capacity of healthcare providers in order to set aside personal opinions and provide rights-based comprehensive care to adolescents. Thank you.
Thank you, Agnes, for a very comprehensive presentation and a reminder to us of what are the methods that are available, the method mix, and the need for free and full and informed choices for all women and for the adolescents. Thank you very much. We're going to move on to our next presenter. Antoinette Hans is a multi-passionate powerhouse. Antoinette is recognized as a creative and revolutionary youth leader who promotes the education of women to have autonomy over their sexual and reproductive health to truly reach their peak state of empowerment. In that regard, she co-directs a grassroots non-profit organization called Girls Who Know JA and is the director of marketing on the U Report Youth Advisory Council. Help me to welcome Antoinette Hans, our youth presenter, who will answer some questions for us. And the questions we have are why actions to reduce adolescent pregnancies must remain a priority. And given the actions, well, I think that's the main question for her. Why actions to reduce adolescent pregnancies must remain a priority. Over to you now, Antoinette.
Thank you so much, Sheila. Hello to everyone who's joining. Thank you so much to the planning team for having me as a part of this very important, vital discussion. So just to get started, teenage pregnancy, adolescent pregnancy in Jamaica is indeed a serious issue. And 18% of all births in Jamaica, occur as teenage pregnancy, which in and of itself is a daunting statistic, it's a daunting experience, and it is certainly something that we have to really push and to collaborate our efforts in curtailing. the major issues or challenges that are faced by young women and girls who get pregnant here in Jamaica are pretty obvious. There are two key points. So first is that they drop out of school. So by virtue of, dropping out of school by getting pregnant, they're unable to further their educations. They're stripped of that chance at economic empowerment, social empowerment, and it kind of stagnates their progression. In addition to that, a lot of young girls receive minimal or no support from their baby fathers, just by virtue of the age or the situation by which they would have gotten pregnant. It's really hard for them to even be able to sustain themselves. The father who would have, done such a thing is unable to sustain the mother and the child. And so as a result of that, what happens is that the youth development is stagnated, it's destroyed. It also perpetuates a broken family structure that is experienced in Jamaica. And that's certainly one of the most important reasons why reducing adolescent pregnancy should remain a priority, so that we are able to stop the brokenness of family structures in Jamaica. Because here in our land, common law relationships are pretty popular. And they're not the most healthy or sustainable. A lot of children grew up with trauma or experience different forms of abuse, whether it be sexual, verbal, mental. And so just looking at a nation and how much value is added by the youth and what we're able to contribute, I think tackling adolescent pregnancy needs to be prioritized so that we can help to drive sustainable and prosperous, progression for our nation. Children are our future. We hear that all the time. And so it's really important for us to protect that. And a way in which we can protect that is through comprehensive strategies or community programs that tackle the reduction of adolescent pregnancy. And some strategies could be sex and contraceptive counseling, comprehensive sexuality education, and I'm sure you guys would have heard this from the experts before me. And it's absolutely imperative that we address the absence of youth-friendly services for young people here in Jamaica, in the Caribbean, and in other parts of the world as well. And to specifically tackle the cultural barriers so that we are able to effectively promote sexuality, comprehensive sexuality education. And just to elaborate a bit further, in Jamaica, there are different cultural myths or cultural norms that prevent young girls from having the information that they ought to have, or education system here as it relates to sexuality education. It's pretty flawed, and so it's absolutely important for us to address the inconsistencies between social policy and legal framework, because the access that young people have to reproductive health services, medication, advice, and just even confidentiality, as the experts before me would have expressed, is pretty limited. And so those are reasons why it's absolutely important for us to prioritize the actions taken to reduce this issue. We also need to be able to institutionalize family programs, community programs, to really get a one-on-one or more intimate interaction between advocates or just organizations that specialize in this work and teen moms. A few years, I think a year or two ago, Girls Who Know led a teen mom workshop here in Jamaica, which was inspired by the Improve Home Center. And so just from that experience, I personally learned, and my team as well learned, that a lot of young moms get pregnant unintentionally, or it happens unwantedly, whether it be as a result of rape or any other form of sexual abuse. And so even just from that interaction, we also learned that they weren't aware of, how their periods connected to pregnancy and what to do or where to go to even access certain services or to get the help that they would have needed. And just from that real life experience of these young girls, it's evident why it is that we need to prioritize these actions, why it is that we need to host more spaces like this so that young people have access to the information from persons who are reputable and credible in the field, are collectively as a nation, as a region, as a world, aware of the issues and how we individually and collectively can address these issues and to curtail them. Additionally, another reason why we should definitely prioritize this is because of the backlash and the cultural malpractices that I experience here in Jamaica or that are experienced by other countries or in the world as well. Something that typically happens a lot, even with just leading this grassroots nonprofit organization. You will try your best to educate young persons on a specific matter. And after the fact, there is an experience that you always come across with other social bodies or just other persons within society who are trying to suppress the mission or suppress your voice, and they're not facilitative or tolerant of the education that you're trying to disseminate. And so it's absolutely important that if we combine our forces and combine our voices, at some point we'd be able to stop the backlash and to fight against those that are, trying to suppress what we're all here trying to do now, which is to educate, to empower, and to reduce adolescent pregnancy. In addition, prenatal death is something that we absolutely need to address as well. Globally, prenatal deaths are 50% higher amongst infants born to mothers under 20 years old than those born to mothers 20 to 29 years old. And so I think that reason is certainly one that we need to be aware of and prioritize these actions, because we don't want to have any more prenatal deaths. We definitely want a statistic like this to be reduced and to promote just to promote healthy youth development, healthy social development for a young woman. Yes, so for those reasons, I believe that it's absolutely important that we prioritize the reduction of adolescent pregnancy in Jamaica specifically, in the Caribbean, and other parts of the world. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Antoinette, for placing us on a thought pattern in terms of prioritization. And this, I'm sure, will be part of the questions that will come to you. Donna, I think it's so appropriate that we have you for last. Last is really not least. And we all know you as the person, one of the persons behind the scenes and behind the roadmap in introducing.
You need to please speak up a little and speak into the mic, please.
I'm speaking into the mic. Anyway, Donna is the holder of an executive master's in business administration from the University of the West Indies, St. Augustine, and she began her work in sexual and reproductive health 35 years ago at the Family Planning Association of Trinidad and Tobago. In her formative years, she was responsible for research, planning, and evaluation and development of programs to achieve the association's mission. In 1999, she was appointed executive director, and You know, her work really has gone even beyond the boundaries of Trinidad and Tobago, including advocacy work for a number of different groups, comprehensive sexuality education, gender-based violence, and HIV, among other things. And she is a co-chairman of the Caribbean Vulnerable Communities Coalition. I now welcome you, Donna, to share with us on this very important aspect of the roadmap. And I think you can understand why it is that your presentation comes now. The question I have for you is, how can the roadmap make a difference in programming for results? Over to you, Donna.
Thank you very much, Sheila. Let me say thank you very much to PAHO and UNFPA for engaging civil society partners and all the young people to invest their time and energy in what I consider to be a very, very important week, Adolescent Pregnancy Prevention Week in the Caribbean, and to thank all of those who have contributed to what I consider to be a successful event this week. I want to also recognize the panel members this morning. Before I get into the heart of the question, I want to reflect a little bit on the Youth Link Up, Youth Our Truth session that was held yesterday. And I really want to congratulate all those phenomenal young people who spoke so eloquently on their specific needs. We once again heard yesterday their passionate plea for action by our leaders. They were very clear about what their needs are. We heard statements like, respect us for our ability to understand and articulate our own needs. Inspire us by involving us. Prepare us by investing in us. Encourage us by educating us. Nurture us by planning for us. But how can we achieve all these demands, all these requests from our young people, if we continue to deny them access to two of their fundamental human rights? One, their access to information and education, and at least two persons on the panel spoke at length about the importance of comprehensive sexuality education, and also access to universal healthcare, pointing out specifically access to sexual and reproductive healthcare. Let's take a look at the call for action. There were two main requests. One, that member states invest in adolescent and youth health and development to ensure that young people survive, thrive, and are integrally involved in the transformation of the countries in the region. Key strategic areas, one would argue, that can promote significant returns on investment and realize triple dividends in mental health, sexual and reproductive health, mitigating climate change, and healthy lifestyles. And most importantly, it calls for youth engagement in the process. The other one is that youth must also be facilitated to actively engage in processes including advocacy, planning, data collection, and monitoring and evaluation. Given that our focus this week is on adolescent pregnancy prevention, I wish to reiterate the key actions in the roadmap that speaks to sexual and reproductive health and rights, HIV, and STIs. And those include removing medical and financial barriers. So we heard earlier from my colleague Veronica about some of the information regarding the legal aspects of that we need to address in order that young people can have access to services. Providing information and contraceptive services that are evidence-based. We heard as well from one of our esteemed panelists about the need for us to integrate in our educational systems comprehensive sexuality education. We need to create enabling environments to enhance adolescents' access and to use the sexual and reproductive health services that are available. Providing information and services, which we know is key to all young people. Ensuring that healthcare personnel are educated and trained. Part of the problems that we are having as well is the fact that we are often told by healthcare providers that they don't have the necessary information, they don't have the necessary training in order that they can make an impact in this particular area as it relates to services for our young people. Establishing training and awareness for religious leaders, community-based organizations, and non-governmental organizations who are really going to be very important stakeholders as we try to ensure that this roadmap and the recommendations that we are making are integrally are followed through as intended. We also spoke about increasing the ability of relevant institutions, parents, families, and caregivers. What this is showing us, this roadmap is showing us, that it calls for every single one of us at all different levels in society to be part of this process. No one is being left out. So we all have a responsibility, whether we are parent, whether we work as healthcare providers, whether we work as teachers in schools. We are all called upon to ensure that young people, the needs of young people are met according to how they have articulated it. Instituting policies that respect, protect, and fulfill adolescents' rights. And that's what we heard yesterday. We heard their pleas, involve us. All the other things in terms of why the need, we heard from a pregnant young person who was pregnant at 16 or 17, and she talked about her own experience. These are very important for us to understand so that we can build the work and build what we need to do in a way that we are specifically addressing the needs of young people. Engaging young people, engaging young people, engaging young people. And more importantly, establishing the mechanisms for providing the comprehensive education as well as the services. So what we are looking for in order to guide us in terms of ensuring that young people have access to services, have access to the information that they need, it's all there. It's all there in the roadmap. What we need to do now is to include them in our national plans and budgets so that they could be effectively implemented. We have a role to play, even as stakeholders, to advocate with our various governments to ensure that these enter, even during election period, enter their manifestos as commitments to our young people. I heard a call of the Honorable Minister of Health of Guyana, Dr. Frank Anthony, on Monday at the launch of the roadmap, where he called on all the governments in the region to include the roadmap in their national development strategies. And indeed, this is a national development issue. I want to commend all the member states that are taking proactive steps to address adolescent pregnancy prevention. But more needs to be done collaboratively as a region if we are really to make a difference in this regard. And we have what we need right before us, developed by the young people of the Caribbean, the roadmap, What we need, however, is the courage which we must muster in order to pave the road with the steps that will get us to our destination. That is to ensure that young people survive, thrive, and are integrally involved in the transformation of the countries in the region, which is what the roadmap calls for. We are getting some things right, some things. We are doing a lot of research. We are having many, many consultations, and we are developing policies. But where we have not done well is actioning the plans and the policies. Let this not be the fate of this historic roadmap. Many times I've heard over my 35 years experience in Family Planning Association that you go to an office and you find, oh, we have those documents. We know what we need to do in order to ensure that young people's needs are met in the area of sexual and reproductive health. Show me the document. You go to a shelf, dusty. But we continue to do more research in spite of all the data and evidence that we have, in spite of all what our young people are telling us, we still continue to do research. Sonia shared with us the results of some of the studies that looked at opportunity costs, which can help, but perhaps we have to do something similar. Some similar kind of studies looking at the cost of inaction by member states, because to continue to procrastinate in providing comprehensive sexuality education and sexual and reproductive health services to our young people will be too devastating on their health and well-being. So I want to join Sonia in her call and in the call of all the young people around the region. Let us do the right thing now for our young people. Let us not delay any further in acting on their call. I want to thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Donna. And I'm sure you'll all agree with that. That was a fitting ending to the presentation by experts. And just to reiterate something that Donna said, but first I must encourage every single person to read the roadmap and to try to figure out what is your role in reducing adolescent pregnancies. And also to remember what she said, that we must have the courage to pave the road for the steps to the destination. And we really want our young people to survive, to thrive, and be transformed. Thank you very much, Donna, for an excellent presentation. We've actually had 5 excellent presentations and a lot of food for thought. And I know that you will be asking some questions. In fact, we already have some questions to be answered by the panelists. And I'm going to start with, let me just get it right. Okay. The first question for us. And we have a lot of thanks and excellent presentations. So it only goes to show that we have been going pretty well. For some reason, I'm not seeing the questions again. Judith? Okay, here we are. Can we have persons speaking about what happened to them and telling the youth what they think they could have done differently, not what they think. And this can go to any panelist who would like to share with us what may have happened to them. Any takers?
I'd be happy to start, Sheila. I had started having sex before I was married, and so I did not go to a family doctor, who, like most young people, I asked my friends where I could get condoms, and they told me to go to a pharmacy. So I went to a pharmacy as far away from my mother's house, from my house, as I could, to be absolutely sure that my mother would not go there. And like many young people do even today, hung around in the pharmacy till everyone left, and then sheepishly asked for condoms. Sometimes I got them, sometimes I was thrown out. Sadly, that's still the reality today for many people. So yeah, I've told my son, I had sex before I was married. When he asked me whether I masturbate, I told him, yes, I do. Probably most people on the panel today and most participants do, but we need to be able to talk about that. And I've told my son and my daughter, it's perfectly okay for them to have sex before they're married too. Over to you, Sheila.
Okay, and I think that's a good segue into the question and answer, because in truth and in fact, there are several persons who can give the same story. And as you say, even today, but we need the education, and we need to be able to freely speak to the young people, and to be truthful in our conversation with them. Our second question is, what role does sexual shame play in the refusal to implement sexual and reproductive health education and health services for young people? I think that's for you again, Chandra.
No, I'm happy to start this. The thing is, we have to acknowledge that adolescents are sexual beings. A lot of the discussions on sexuality is about telling adolescents about the dangers of unwanted pregnancy and presenting sex as a dangerous thing and the consequences as dangerous. But sex is pleasurable. It's fun. A lot of the discussions in the context of COVID-19, I think of my adolescent days. If my parents were sitting around in the drawing room with the uncles and there's a lockdown, it would be exciting to find somebody to have sex on the side and the risk of that adding to the joy of the sex. We need to talk about sex in those kinds of contexts. So I think not willingness. I mean, Donna said the right things, but why are Caribbean governments not doing these things? They know what to do. Most of the government leaders have probably had sex when they were adolescents. But the question is, do they acknowledge, do they do it? Is there any political support to do it? Uruguay has done it. In 4 years, they achieved tremendous results. Why can't Jamaica do it? Why can't middle-income countries? They should be able to do it. And the only way it's done, I think, is a group of people in the country pushing for this to happen. It's not outside agencies asking for this to happen.
All right. Thank you.
May I comment?
Sure, Donna.
Yeah, and because I want to agree very much with what was just said. I think as well that for a lot of our countries, sex is still considered a taboo issue. It's still considered a taboo issue. And I feel I know why. And I know myself included, because I'm now of a certain age group. I like to consider myself youngish, but I think it is the people who are leading the processes. We're hearing from the young people, why don't we see a youth representative like one of those persons that we had in our chat yesterday, being represented at the ministry level to make changes to the CSE curriculum? We are still the ones that are sitting in those spaces and trying to make a difference on the lives of young people whose situations are different from the ones that we grew up in. When we were growing up, we grew up in villages. Our children are now growing up in the world. And they are far more exposed to information via the internet and all those things. And I think one of the things that we have to confront is the fact that we are sexual beings, and therefore we have to discuss issues around sex. And it doesn't leave us. We can't say that we could put our sexuality on hold and put it down for a while, and then when we get to age 14, 15, 16, we put back our sexuality. It doesn't happen like that. We have to begin to address the sexuality of our young people from the time they're born until they die. It's a whole life cycle approach that has to be implemented. And I think we need to educate our leaders. We need to sit at the CARICOM level when they're having their meetings and talk to our leaders about what is happening to our young people by they not taking the necessary action. So I feel that the whole issue around the taboo still exists. We still have heads buried in the sand, and we need to pull those heads out of the sand and confront the issues. We also, and we don't talk about it, we also have a deeply religious grouping in our societies. And therefore, when we come to the table, it's very hard to make the decision, should they or should they not? Because there are some people who are more influenced than others. So I think the time has come, and the time is now, especially during COVID. I wouldn't like us to do a study now to see what has happened with teenage pregnancy, because we all locked up together, right? So I am saying that one of the things that we have to do is that we have to break this taboo, where it is believed that young people should not have access to this information. That was in my days. That was when I was growing up. And I was told that, a stork bought me or a plane dropped me. My granddaughter knows exactly how she was born. So I think we have to stop this, well, I call it nonsense, and get with the reality, get with our parents, get with our teachers, get with our leaders, and get with all the faith-based organizations, and have the young people speak directly to them and talk about the importance of making the change now. We need to implement a roadmap. There is no way we can make any headway if we don't at least start with the roadmap and call on our governments to put aside the necessary investment. The people are doing budgets all now to ensure that we can treat with the issues of our young people, or else we lose a whole generation.
Thank you, Donna. Well said. I think there was a comment that the young people need to now take this on as well. I think what we are asked to do is to build the capacity of the young people to be advocates to move this forward, because you can decide to work with parents and to give them the information we have. That may take a long time. We need to now start with young people and get them on the platform, on the roadmap track. Okay, thank you. All right, let's go to another question, which I think is we need to move on a little bit. To make progress in preventing adolescent pregnancy in the Caribbean, we need proper data collection. How we ensure data collection that will lead to adequate policy to mitigate adolescent pregnancy. I think it should be, how can we ensure data collection, that will lead to adequate policy making. Who is going to take that? Sonia? Sonia?
Sure, yes, thank you. I'll be very brief. Maybe Chandra wants to add. I agree that data is important, but I think Donna mentioned it. There is already a lot of data. And so we don't have to wait for data. Yes, it's going to be important to make sure that we know what the coverage is, locally of essential services and who is being left behind. But at the same time, I believe that we have enough information to move forward. So yes and no.
Yeah, thank you, Sonia.
I'd love to add to that. I completely agree with Sonia. Yes, we need more evidence. Yes, we need more data, but we have more than enough data and evidence to do what needs to be done. And evidence generation can continue, and data generation can continue as we do our work. It's a learning by doing agenda. What I'm going to do after this webinar is share with you a bank of papers that we have published over the last 5 years from a number of countries which have scaled up sexuality education. And I'm just going to talk to you about two of them now. One of them is Pakistan. I'm not from Pakistan, I'm from India, traditionally a rival of Pakistan. But I'm a great fan of what Pakistan has done on sexuality education. Now, Pakistan is an Islamic country, sliding into Islamic fundamentalism. But a group of NGOs have used the national policy on CSC. They don't call it CSC there. They call it life skills-based education. But they've actually done enormous amount of work, much more than many states of India have done, because they have learned to work with 4 issues. They chose issues to address strategically. Parents want their girls to be taught about sexual harassment on the street. They want to be talked about what happens in child marriage. They frame issues carefully. They get it vetted. They don't go to religious leaders. They go to human rights advocates. And then they involve the communities in the discussion. And what they've done is, you may have watched this terrible periodic reports of the sexual abuse of boys and girls in Pakistan. They've used these opportunities to educate communities that if your son or daughter knew about these issues, that wouldn't happen to them. So you can't wait till the religious right comes on board. They won't. They are funded by the evangelical right in the US, and they are actually poisoning the climate everywhere. We need to work with them. We need to work against them. The other example is Mexico. Mexico has a national sexuality education program, which is 30 years old, which has worked despite the fact that it's a Catholic country and a strong evangelical church backlash, but supported at the national level. So there are countries which have dealt with religious resistance. And I think what we must do is learn from them. And as we move forward, document successes in your region. And we'd be very happy to work with WHO and UNFPA to do that.
Thank
Over
you.
to you. Thank you
for that offer. I just want to add something, though, that it's not so much that we don't have data. It's the quality of the information. And very often what we see that there are tremendous gaps, age disaggregation, for instance, in our general health information systems. So if we need to work on that in the Caribbean region. Okay. So, okay, our next question is, it's a legal question, so I think this is for Veronica. Wow, it just shifted. Yes, if I understood correctly, in English law jurisdictions, when we're treating minors is not explicitly prohibited. The Gillick-Fraser competency tests could be adopted at administrative levels. My question is gone. Without a need for legislation, for example, by guidance to practitioners, by a medical counsel. Is this a correct interpretation? Did you get that, Veronica, or do I need to read?
Sheila, I actually answered it live. I sent a live answer already. So the short answer is yes. I think it's evident from all of the panelists that the issues are very much interwoven. And I think Chandra is the one who said there is not one. There are many input points that have to be done for all of those issues to be addressed, whether it's comprehensive sexuality education, and whether it's access to treatment and other services, etc. It's multi-pronged. In terms of the implementation, if you want to call it, of daily competency, it comes up with the same barriers that you would have in terms of comprehensive sexuality education, except that the target audience, where the law is silent on the age, the minimum age to access services, then there is a window of opportunity to introduce daily competency. And I say at the administrative level, but to be legally technical, it would be at the level of rules and regulations under either a medical act, an act which empowers or licenses medical professionals, which may also have something like a code of ethics. So these are generally passed by way of rules and regulations under the act. They do not require parliamentary approval. It can be passed as a statutory instrument by a minister. Of course, the legal and medical councils would have to agree. So Guyana is an example of that, where you have the regulations that expressly provides for the acknowledgement of a Gillick competency, a modified version of the Gillick competency test that medical professionals can use to treat persons or children or minors under 16. In 16 and under in Guyana. Guyana is actually an example where the law is otherwise silent, so it's assumed that it is 18, but because of the impact of the regulations, it is clear that children 16 and over can receive care, but it also allows for an assessment to be made of children under 16. So the answer to that is yes, and I have put in a response online.
Thank you very much. I think this is our last question.
We can't hear you, Sheila.
You're on mute, Sheila.
Oh, thank you. This is our last question, and the remaining questions will be addressed online, as we are really running out of time. And I just would like to thank our panelists for really providing us with excellent presentations that we can use in our work, and as we advocate more for accelerating the prevention of teenage pregnancies. I think we will find this very useful. We thank Chandra for agreeing to send us additional information. And above all, I would like to encourage the entire Caribbean, especially those in positions of power and influence, and our young people particularly, to just spread the news about the roadmap, to take out the key areas, to look at what you can do now in promoting it, so that next year when we meet, we can actually be having more of a dialogue in what we are doing, what have been some of the results we're seeing, and so we can help each other in this roadmap track. So I want to thank you all very much, and we're going to move on to the end of the this meeting, where we will now ask for the summarization by Pilar, Mrs. Pilar de Molina, who is from UNFPA, and also she will be joined by Sonia Cafe.
Hi, everybody, and thanks to all for the excellent presentations and discussion. I'm not putting my camera because actually I'm my cell phone right now because internet is very unstable at the moment. So very interesting, and I would like to highlight 2 or 3 points from each presenter, and this information and this discussion will also be taken into consideration by the Caribbean platform, Sexual Reproductive Health and Maternal Newborn Health, moving forward along with the recommendations of the roadmap. But many of the issues that have been highlighted are pretty aligned with the roadmap. So I would start with Sonia, and she brought to us especially would like to highlight the enormous opportunity cost associated with adolescents' pregnancy. And I would like to highlight here that UNFPA is undertaking actually now a study in Guyana. So it will be the first analysis of this kind, inspired by the studies done by UNFPA in Latin America. So hopefully we will have some results that we can share throughout the Caribbean. She also highlighted what we know what works, and especially highlighting the importance of information, education, counseling, and access to contraceptives. And she also highlighted the social economic impact of COVID-19. Veronica brought to us especially highlighting the legal gap that exists in many countries between the age of consent to sexual activity and the legal age of access to sexual and reproductive health services, which results in a critical limitation in adolescents and youth accessing services. And she also brought to us the issue that in some countries the law is silent, and therefore in this case is the age of access might be considered 18 years old. So we can clearly see here a huge legal barriers in terms of accessing to services. And I'm not going to expand on this, but she also brought to us the possibility for some countries on applying the Gilead competency test as a strategy to overcome the legal barriers. So the key recommendation, of course, is that the laws should be enacted to ensure access to sexual and reproductive health services, irrespective of age or third party or any other legal impediments. And as soon as we have the final document of the SRH legislation, we will be organizing a webinar to share the situation across 22 countries throughout the Caribbean, English and Dutch Caribbean, just as a note of information. Then Chandra Muley brought to us specifically attention to comprehensive sexuality education and all the evidence that exists. This is an evidence-based intervention. We know that works. We know that it's critical for ensuring good sexual and reproductive health outcomes, but the translation of this evidence at country level, it's uneven and patchy, and we know that poor delivery is among the factors, but also socio-cultural backlash. And we know that the Caribbean is a very conservative society, and we know that this is one of the limitations that impedes to deliver comprehensive sexuality education as guided by the international guidelines. Then Agnes brought to us the critical importance of ensuring full, free, and informed choice, ensuring that clients, and specifically adolescents, can have access to a wide range of contraceptives. This is critical to ensure ending unmet need for family planning. And she highlighted that, and we all know, but we also know the providers' bias in many cases, that age itself is not a medical reason for denying teenagers any method, but we know that this is a reality. And she highlighted the importance of building the capacity of health providers in order to ensure that the services are responsive to the needs of adolescents. And of course, she brought the attention to us of the importance of the providers to be guided by the medical eligibility criteria of WHO. Then Antoinette Hans highlighted the negative impacts of adolescents' pregnancy, and she also highlighted the critical importance of ensuring access to contraceptives and counseling and comprehensive sexuality education, and the need to tackle the cultural barriers to implement them effectively. And of course, she highlighted the need to address and prioritize actions involving the adolescents and youth in the development of programs. And then Donna Da Costa brought to us and highlighted the many actions and recommendations of the roadmap regarding to sexual and reproductive health that I'm not gonna go extensively through them, but I think that again, she highlighted the two fundamental rights: access to information and education, and access to sexual and reproductive health care as critical. And she laid out, of course, the need to engage young people in national budget planning processes and other processes to ensure that they are involved in the planning and monitoring processes. And I like her last quote saying, "Let's do the right thing now." Yeah? So we know the evidence, and I think all the panelists have brought to us the attention that we know what works, but then applying what works at the national level, sometimes we can see a huge gap. And this is for now. I don't think I'm gonna go through the Q&A because it was more or less a clarification of what was being said before. But I must say that I think it was a very interesting interaction, and the presentations, I think they highlighted the key evidence-based interventions that we know that work, but we know that we have a lot of challenges in the Caribbean to ensure adolescents pregnancy prevention in this region. Over.
Thank you very much, Pilar de la Corte Molina. I hope I've said it right this time.
Yes, it's right.
For summarizing for us, a whole lot was being said, but we are thankful that you're able to succinctly put it together. Just to say that it has been an excellent expert meeting, and I realize that we have had some comments asking for the roadmap. We're going to have to find a way to get the roadmap to key persons so that it can be transmitted throughout the countries. And adolescents themselves are very clear on what it is saying, what we have asked for countries, member states to be committed to, and what they themselves have said they will commit to. And let's do the right thing. Before I ask Pilar to do the vote of thanks, let me thank the organizers. Let me also thank the persons behind the scenes, including Sandra Jones, who has worked very hard on this, and also Judith Braille from Suriname, UNFPA, and to thank UNFPA and PAHO for spearheading this. And now I'm going to ask Sonia and Pilar to close out with the vote of thanks. Thank you.
Okay, I can go ahead, and I think for time sake, I think that might be the only one. But Sonja is welcome to do after me if she wants to add any words. But in summary, I just we have come to the end of what has been a very engaging session on adolescents pregnancy prevention. And today's virtual meeting amidst the COVID pandemic is a very clear affirmation and display of our joint commitment to addressing adolescents pregnancy in the Caribbean. The content of the session was rich, the questions thoughtful, the discussion spirit, and the meeting entirely fruitful. And so I embrace the opportunity to extend appreciation to those who contributed to the realization of this important event. And as you said, I would like to start thanking Sandra Jones for her spirit and motivation and driving us, all of us, even when we were with lacking of time and energy. And also I would like to thank as well my colleague Judith Briel in Suriname for helping the group to organize this session. And then allow me to begin expressing gratitude to our panelists, Veronica Sinek, who is our consultant, Agnes Shirankia from UNFPA headquarters, Chandra Muley from WTO, Donna Da Costa from the SRH Coalition, and Antoinette Hans from Girls Who Know Ya, who made it a priority to be here today with us. And we thank you all for your meaningful input and for rousing an informative discourse on the factors that contribute to adolescent pregnancy in the Caribbean. We recognize that comprehensive sexuality education and access to sexual and reproductive health services for adolescents are causes that we must continue to champion, even amidst the legal hurdles and conservative environment that are still a challenge in the Caribbean. I also take the opportunity to especially thank Antoinette Hans for lending her time and her voice to this panel. And UNFPA remains firmly committed to the stance of nothing for us without us, and as such, as no meaningful discussion on adolescence can be had without the clear and strong input of our youth. To our moderator, Sheila Forrester, we convey our sincere gratitude for deflating and guiding us throughout the segments, and we also thank Sonia Cafe for framing the context of our discussions by reminding us of the critically of and the gains to be had as a region by preventing adolescent pregnancy. I also wish to acknowledge with gratitude members of the Planning Committee of the Caribbean Congress on Adolescence and Youth Health, the person from the Pan-American Health Organization, the UNFPA Population Fund in the Caribbean and Latin America, who collaborate to bring this segment and indeed the entire Adolescent Pregnancy Prevention Week to fruition. Indeed, the proceedings at the week have shown that adolescents, youth, stakeholders, and members of the general public wish to be engaged in preventing adolescent pregnancy, and this forum was critical to doing so. We thank you all for joining us, and I charge us all to ensure that this momentum is maintained and we keep working towards preventing adolescent pregnancy in the Caribbean. And as said by Donna, let's do the right thing now. Thank you all.
Thank you for thanking us, Pilar. And just to remember, this meeting is now closed. The work continues. Our luta continues, the struggle continues, but we'll overcome. Thank you very much. God bless you all.
Thanks to all. Thanks, Sheila.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.